It's Nick and Neil's Summer Millwall History Show.
Hello, dear listener, Neil here. A very warm welcome to Nick and Neil's History Show and our Millwall Summer Specials. The aim of Nick and myself is to build a library of 20, 25-minute shows you can dip in and out of in the car, in the gym or on the train, anywhere you like, really. This is proper history, lots of unbelievable stories that we should know but don't. So here we are, rescuing these stories from obscurity and breathing new life into them. Nick and I feel that as a club, we don't make the most of our rich history, and it's a subject that is often ignored. And we hope this series will bring to life some of the events and characters of our past. It's been a real pleasure to research this series, and I hope you enjoy listening to them as much as we have enjoyed making them. Enjoy.
It's Nick and Neil's Summer Millwall History Show.
So we're talking, Neil, about the wartime cup final run, 1944 to 1945, a dramatic time in our national history, and equally, from a Millwall perspective, a dramatic period in our own club history. Very, very odd period in some respect, wasn't it?
It was. It wasn't a particularly successful season. I know we reached a cup final and that, but our league form was absolutely appalling. I think we were bottom of the Football League Southern section.
Yeah.
For quite a lot of it. We'd only had like one win, and we'd only taken 9 points from 22 games. And then the board of directors actually made an inspired decision. They actually moved Bill Voisey aside in, I think, early November. He'd go on to become our chief talent spotter, but they brought in Jack Cock, who
famous name,
absolutely had played for Millwall, England, Chelsea, Plymouth. The list could go on. He was really the first celebrity footballer, if you like, in the immediate post-First War period.
And we've covered him previously, haven't we? I mean, we did a show about Jack Cock, star of stage and screen, I think, as well, in his time, as well as being as a football career. Quite a remarkable character. And as you say, a celebrity name to come in when we needed it, really, looking at the league form.
Yeah, war hero as well. Let's not forget that. He was actually running a pub in New Cross at the time.
Yeah, the Rose, I believe. War hero, as was Voisey, listeners, incidentally. This was the nature of the time. I suppose we should just explain to listeners that the football did continue during the war. Increasingly, as it wore on, I think it's probably fair to say initially it was fairly limited, Neil, wasn't it? But then it expanded towards the late stages of the conflict to this season here, where we would make a wartime cup final, but the league was divided into northern and southern sections to minimise travelling back when the teams weren't going too far.
Yeah, but it was even more limited than that. You couldn't go much further than, I think it was they were trying to limit it to something like a 50-mile radius, even. Well, even actually less than that. So with all of the clubs in the south, they were trying to clump clubs together. I know that in this cup competition, we went to Brighton, and in the league, we went to Aldershot. First game of the season was away at Aldershot, but we weren't. I just had a look then if you look in the back of Richard Lindsay's book, the sheer number of players that we used that season was absolutely unbelievable. We used something like 30, 40, maybe even 50 players. The list is endless in there. Bill Voisey had a great thing where I think we'll come on to it in a minute. We're going to talk about guests, but Bill Voisey didn't want to over-rely on guest players. His idea was he would rather use good young players that would serve Millwall in the future, which isn't an awful lot of good when you're up against Yeah, when you're up against seasoned internationals, we're going to talk about some games here and some of
Yeah.
the turned out against Millwall. But I think that Jack Cock came in and he changed the philosophy somewhat. He started to introduce more guest players, more experienced players, and I think that's what told during this cup run.
Just to explain to listeners, the guest system, I suppose it's not a million miles, Neil, from the modern day loan system. And the same debate strikes me. You know, some things are eternal, aren't they? That kind of debate between bringing in loan players, or whichever way you want to call them, or guest players in wartime, as against trying to develop your own talent and plan for the future. This is an eternal Millwall dilemma. But the guest system rested on the whole country was committed to the war, so footballers were often servicemen and moved around the country as operation requirements needed. So you could well find yourself, as we will come to see, with some fairly big name and star players in the London area because they're in a unit that was, you know, in the area, or training, or transferring, or whatever the case may be. It was very much a wartime make do and mend type of approach to football in some ways.
Yeah, pretty much, and don't forget, you also had players on war work. They were working in factories.
Yeah, essential.
Yeah, not only were they maybe in the services, an awful lot of Millwall's team served in the volunteer police, the police reserve, and
Okay, yeah.
things like that. And I guess that playing for Millwall on a Saturday afternoon to some people, to some commanding officers and high-ranking police officers, it probably wasn't awfully high up on their list of
Wasn't a
priorities.
priority. No.
So I think the recurring theme is certainly through towards the end, near the cup final, was you could name a team on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and you'd have to change it 24 hours later because, because you suddenly found out that a player wasn't available, and there's this limited pool of players. I think we'll come on to talking about Len Golden,
Yeah,
who played against Millwall in the cup final, but Millwall actually also wanted him.
right.
But so did Sport and Integrity FC that we played in the final. And West Ham left it to him to make the choice. And
Right.
ultimately, he chose to play for Chelsea. So it's a weird situation, and yeah, but he was only available for Sport and Integrity FC because he actually missed the bus to play in the semi-final.
It's a different time, isn't it?
Against Chelsea. It was going to
Yeah.
be almost up until kickoff. There were stories of players not getting there in time, so teams started with 9, 10 men, 8 men in some cases, and the players trotted out, and the players trotted out almost like Sunday morning football. Well, you get here when you get here, we'll put you on.
I mean, we're talking about the 1944 to 45 season, listeners. The war itself would come to a conclusion in late April, early May, with the surrender of Germany. So these months that we're talking about near are, from a football perspective, of course, but they're set in a very dramatic period of world history, because the conflicts in Europe, for certain, was coming towards the final days. There must have been a tremendous sense of tension mixed with relief, impending relief, I suppose, because it wasn't over and done with, and until the conflict was concluded, then men were still fighting and dying. So we're talking about, from the period that we're covering here, listeners, really relates to the run up to the wartime cup final, February, March, and I believe the game was played in April. So the final concluding moments of the biggest conflict the world has ever seen. And in the midst of that, football was seen as a kind of an escapism, Neil, I suppose, a form of entertainment for people that have had it hard for up to 6 years.
Yeah, I think you could almost draw some correlation with the pandemic in some respects. That cancelled everything, didn't it, and changed everybody's life. And and very much Millwall for us certainly was a relief in the last,
Absolutely. Yeah.
wasn't it? So you can actually draw some parallels between then and now, very much so. Well, we weren't out of the woods in both respects, so to speak, but I think we turned the corner, hadn't we? And the end was in sight, especially towards February 45.
February, you had the Soviets approaching from the east and the Allies from the west, and the days of the war looked numbered. But
They were
until it's
closing
done,
in, weren't they? Yeah, but it was like Hitler's last stand, wasn't it, in Berlin? And
yeah, I think also, until the war was concluded, no one really knew what might lie around the next corner. There was all sorts of you had what they called super weapons. You had V2 strikes going on, which this is all these games have been played in the context of rocket attacks. Modern warfare was dawning. So very, it always seems a bit weird, Neil, to talk about football in these times, because you have to contrast it with the very, some massive world events going on the continent and in this country. But football is our medium that we talk about, listeners. So we're going to look at a few of these games that led up to Millwall's prior to the Auto Windscreen Cup final, our only appearance at Wembley, wasn't it? That walk up appearance in 1945.
yes, it was, and we weren't able to take as many fans. I think both us and I'll stop calling them Sport and Integrity FC. I think I think I've made the point, haven't I?
Chelsea.
Yeah, Chelsea. I think we were both granted 800 tickets or 1,600 tickets, something like that. Certainly, some seats and some standing, but the rest were actually made available for the public. So, but we started off that run with a 3-1 win at Fulham, and Jimmy Jinks,
a famous Millwall name, Jimmy Jinks. Who I read one of the reports for. I didn't go too deeply into some of these games, listeners, because we're trying to bring these in under 25 minutes, Neil. We've reduced waffle from me, but he's referred to as Jimmy Jinks, one of the defenders of Malta. And one of the things that strikes me with all of these players and reports of all clubs is how, just in passing, Jimmy Jinks, Millwall hero, big name, was in the siege of Malta. no easy place to find yourself, bombarded by the Luftwaffe on the island of Malta in the Mediterranean. But he scored a hat-trick in this win, 3-1 win at Fulham on February the 3rd. Followed up swiftly, I see, Neil, by another win at home, this time over Brentford, a 3-2 win over the Bees.
Yeah, that's right. And I think a couple of guests scored in that, Russell Phillips and George Ludford. But there was something... There was something that struck me, was a report from the Middlesex Chronicle on the Millwall crowd.
This is why I like this show, listeners. Reports from the Middlesex Chronicle.
We don't really want to go off on a tangent, but
no.
I think this sums up Millwall. A large section evidently looks at football from a corresponding angle. Fouls by the home players were often overlooked or even cheered. But if Millwallite fell or stumbled after coming into contact with a bee, 9,553 spectators seem to have 4 throats apiece. Except with the firmest officiating, refereeing under such circumstances tends towards crowd appeasement. I'd rather snatch a bone away from a bulldog than award a penalty kick against a home side at the Den.
Nothing changes.
Yeah, well, maybe we don't get decent referees these days. But the whinging. Yeah, we can see this guy had probably gone home, had probably stewed upon this for a couple of days and was probably incredulous. Yeah, but let's face it, the Millwall crowd back then, it wouldn't be day trippers and...
No, they've been hardcore dockers and their men on home from the army and the like. great saying about everything changes yet nothing changes, and I think that goes for Millwall more than any other club in the country. So even the Millwall fouls were cheered. I think we all know that moment, don't we, when people get cheered off after chinning someone on the field or some such. But that good run, Neil, we're praising Jack Cock for putting a good run together, comes to a bit of a juddering halt the week after at Brighton, a 6-2 loss.
Yeah, a guy called Cyril Hodges, an Arsenal guest player, scored 4 goals. I think there was the opening day defeat that we suffered against Aldershot. A guy called George Antonio from Stoke scored 5 of the 6 in a 6-3 wins. But even more amazingly was we actually had Tommy Lawton playing for us that day. He was the First Division's leading goal scorer in 38-39. Was on leave from the army in the Brighton area. I think he was probably based in Aldershot or somewhere like that. Was on leave, and Jack Cock persuaded him to play, but he made absolutely no difference whatsoever. I'm not even sure he got much of a kick. I'm not sure he got much more of a kick. Yeah, but this guy's the Harry Kane of the day.
He was my grandfather's favourite player. Tommy Lawton always said, he was good, Lawton. He was a top player.
Except when he pulled on the Millwall
shirt on. Tell us something new. So a 6-2 thumping at, that would have been the Goldstone ground back then, 1945. Followed up by, thankfully back on winning ways the week after, a 1-0 win over Fulham. I see. I've never heard of Di Ridley, who was scored in that game. I don't know him at all.
Yeah, he was a Welshman from South Wales. I think was probably more famous as a non-league player. I think he might have played for Brighton actually at one stage, but probably actually better known for playing for Bedford. But that's the beauty of these games. You do not know who you're looking at. I was looking at a guest player called O'Connell earlier on. Eventually, I found him. He was a little-known left winger, served in the police with Lenny Tyler.
Right.
So obviously that's how he got a game. But then we come on to Brentford, the return game.
Yep.
We borrow a goalkeeper called Ernie Gregory, very famous former West Ham player.
I was going to say, I've heard of Ernie Gregory, yep.
And he has an absolute fucking nightmare. He gives Brentford 2 goals, but thank God for Jimmy Jinks, he scored 2 goals.
Pulled us back into it. These things never change, do they? West Ham goalkeepers having nightmares in Millwall goals and giving away leads, but there we are. So we go into March. Brighton a 1-0 win for Millwall on the 10th of March. A guest from Heart and Midlothian, I see in your notes here, Neil, from Tom Stevenson.
Yeah, that's right. Was based in the West Country. Somehow found his way to South East London. God knows how they found these players. I think sometimes players offered their services.
Yeah,
they might be in the London area on a course or so.
Whatever. Yeah, they're passing through for some reason.
You didn't have agents touting players around back then. It's quite remarkable when you look at it how these players actually came to play for us. And this is another case, a player who went up and just had a career in Scottish football after the war, played for the likes of Alloa, I think, and an outpost like that, Bonaccord Shots.
Okay, right, we are. Go deep and obscure Scottish football there. Tom Stevenson, so he scored for the Lions in a 1-0 win over Brighton. Before we come to the start of the big time now, we're talking about the semi-final of this was the Football League South Cup, Neil. I think that there's I've fallen for this. I've called it the Wartime Cup, but it's actually a true name is the Football League South Cup, I believe, for the competition.
Yeah, what happened was it was the FA Cup of the day, but to cut down on the travelling, they split it into North and South. So we were in the southern section. There was a northern section. I think Bolton ended up playing Chelsea in the final that season.
Right.
And Yeah, but that's how this came about. We're in the southern section. It's it is the wartime cup. It's the wartime FA Cup, basically.
Effectively.
Yeah.
Played at Stamford Bridge, which was a big ground. I mean, this was the old Stamford Bridge, Neil, with the kind of oval shape. I think it's a greyhound track around the football field of play. It was a big stadium for the times. We played Arsenal there, and I see that we have a famous Charlton name in goal for us, Sam Bartram.
Yeah, we do. Arguably, it was the highlight of his career.
All those games with Charlton weren't they? Our goalkeeper dropping out, as you said. I mean, as you've alluded to. I mean, 24 hours notice. Ernie Gregory not available. We've had to find another goalkeeper. So up comes Sam Bartram. And does well for us.
Yeah, but it couldn't be a better. Game for him, could it? To come in, he saves a Stan Mortensen penalty.
Yeah,
Stan Mortensen of the Matthews Mortensen Cup final was another player based in the south. Played a lot for Arsenal. Played for quite a few teams back then, and he missed a penalty. Then the referee must have been an Arsenal fan. He gave him another penalty in the second half. Handball against Ted Smith, an England international. But they blasted it over the bar. Wild excitement.
50,000 wild excitement. And there's a great quote that you've got here from Jack Cock, Millwall manager, in the aftermath of this 1-0 win that took us to Wembley, which must have been, this would be the first ever time that the club had made that level of football ever, really. I know we're a big club pre-First World War, but this would have been a massive moment.
2 or 3 cup semi-finals, didn't we? FA Cup semi-final.
Yeah, played at Derby and far-flung Sheffield and places like that, weren't they?
Yeah,
but this was the proper thing. Played at Wembley. There's a great quote from Jack Cocker, which I'll read if I may. Now it says, "I'm overwhelmed. I thought we had a chance, but to beat Arsenal, I can hardly believe it's true. We owe a great debt to Bartram, but all of our men played grandly," said Jack Cock. You kind of get a sense of the emotion of the moment in that quote. Actually, I think it comes over.
Yeah, definitely. And this wasn't a Mickey Mouse Arsenal team. It contained Cliff Bastin, the boy Bastin, an all-star attack. Obviously, Mortensen, Ted Drake.
Yeah, big name. Yeah,
10-goal, and Maurice Edelston, who was a big name amateur international.
So massive win for little old Millwall. I mean, let's not forget the struggles that the club had to survive the wartime period, because it was not easy being right in the middle of the docks, where your ground, as we know, took a pounding. For massive explosion in the clock corner at the bend. So this was a major achievement for our club. Sadly, the final, which was played on the 7th of April 1945, and also just a few weeks short of the final acts of the Second World War, was not a great was something of a disappointment from the Mill perspective. A 2-0 loss and a poor game by all accounts.
Yeah, what is it about us and finals? The Auto Windscreen Shield was a major disappointment, and the FA Cup semi-final.
We get so few of them. That's why, I think. 90,000 in the old stadium. Wonderful event. And this would have been this would have just had roofs along the sides. I think that both of the ends were these great curved open terraces back then. In attendance were the royalty, George VI, King George VI, Queen, and Princess Elizabeth, wearing her ATS uniform, which is like a cadet force, wasn't it, from the youth kind of wartime force. And Princess Margaret attending her first game. So the future Queen was in attendance at this game.
You can probably tell why Princess Margaret turned to drink, can't you? So much towards the end of her life.
After watching, by all accounts, a very, very poor game. I think there's a famous quote about the first half. Charles Buchan, I'm just reading down. Charles Buchan, Neil, from your notes, said it called the first half one of the worst halves of football he'd ever seen. Now, that given that he was a major journalist, he would have seen some poor football. That's quite a statement, isn't it?
Yeah, he probably took part in some poor games as well. But this was, but you can just see that we spoke about the guest system, and really Millwall didn't know what some of the team was going to be right up until virtually 48 hours before kickoff. But there are lots of great stories about this. How 5,000 servicemen and women were guests of the FA for this game. They were all given invitation cards.
Yeah.
That had to be exchanged at the turnstiles, and it said on them, "You must be in uniform." And there were, obviously there were uniform and plainclothes police carrying out petrol checks.
Petrol checks.
With particular attention that you weren't allowed within a 10-mile limit. There was a 10-mile limit, I think, of central London for Hackney carriages, so you couldn't actually jump in a cab and go to Wembley because petrol was in such short supply back then.
Absolutely, it was, and will continue to be so post-war as well. So yeah, these were tough times.
So the other thing that was mentioned was supplies of food were limited, so supporters were advised to bring their own refreshments.
Bring your own sandwiches wrapped up in brown paper. Different times, weren't they? I see that we wore white. We wore England shirts. Is that? I didn't know that, Neil. That's a fact I'd not come across before in the final. The colour clash.
Yeah, because both teams wore blue. I think they decided the fairest way would be to make us wear white and Chelsea wear red, and obviously white shirts, football shirts were very difficult to get hold of. There are stories of clubs making appeals for people to give them clothing coupons.
Yeah. To kit their side out.
Yeah. So we actually got, it's probably actually one of the only favours the FA's ever done us in the history of the club. Was
they borrowed England shirts to play in the final. That's a fascinating. And Chelsea wore red, so there's no clash. I suppose that's the England away shirts they borrowed there, I guess. One thing that always strikes me at the end of when the first, I've seen pictures of the first Millwall post-war side, and just on the clothing point, the players are wearing different styles of shirt, basically blue, but some have got white sleeves, some of the old pre-war blue kind of rugby almost looking shirts. And it gives you a sense of the hard times because it really was kit scraped together as best they could, Neil, in the aftermath of the conflict.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, but the rules of the competition, they didn't have any rules as such. In the but in the semi-final, we had to play to a finish, and
so no replays.
Yeah, there were no replays. Obviously, they didn't want replays because it was bad enough getting players released for games on a Saturday, and during the war they played rep games during the week and things like that. But the clubs didn't play, so they actually decided that there would be extra time. Yeah, because the rules didn't stipulate extra time. Just play to a finish, but it was either the first goal or the first corner kick. So if you got a corner in the first minute, you won the cup.
You won the cup. Get it all over and done with. Oh dear.
Media these days, it would actually have gone into meltdown, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Lions came into,
but it wasn't a good final for Millwall.
We came into it the underdogs, and I think we matched up with the bookmakers' expectations. Chelsea 7-4 favourites. I see Mill 2-1 against. I don't think we surprised anyone. Goals in the 47th minute from John McDonald, a shot from 20 yards for 1-0 for Chelsea, and then just a couple of minutes later, Joe Payne shot diverted by Ted Smith for 2-0, and that was game largely. Although we did hit the. Is that Rawlings hit the bar? Was that out? Was he?
Yes, Sid Rawlings. But apparently we lack cohesion in attack. There was actually a line I liked from the Weekly Dispatch that said that Sailor Brown worked like a slave.
Yeah, there's different times of journalism, Neil. You wouldn't use that line anymore, mate. Don't use that in your rugby account next time you go to press.
Oh, mate, I tell you what. Yeah, well, I wish I could get away with it, honestly.
At the end of your career, mate. Yeah.
And I think that it was noted that Chelsea were moderate, Millwall was poor, or were
Yeah,
poor.
so don't sound like a great game. Let's read through the Millwall team that day, Neil. Sam Bartram in goal, the Charlton player. Some famous names come out: Reg Dudley and George Fisher, one of the Fisher brothers for Millwall. George Ludford, that's the player that scored against us, I think, earlier on in one of the games that we played.
No, he scored for us earlier on.
For us. Ted Smith, Len Tyler, Sid Rawlings, Sailor Brown from Charlton, Jimmy Jinks, Tom Brown, and Stan Williams of Aberdeen. So a mixed group of players there, really.
The Chelsea side actually contained 8 guests, including Danny Winter, Ian Black, who was a Scottish goalkeeper, George Hardwick, England and Middlesbrough after the war, Len Golden, as we said, Les Smith and Brentford. I think he played for England as well. So it's just, we're up against it. And I think our safety first policy, which we seem to adopt in all cup finals at Wembley.
Are you listening, Gary Rowett?
He'd be proud, wouldn't he, of this?
Oh dear, there we are. A great club event. It remained, despite the disappointment of the game and the result, it remains. The pictures are iconic of the Mill team meeting George VI, and just the mere fact that we were there, I think, is it's one of the landmark moments in our club's history. Hence, its inclusion in this edition of Neil and Nick's History Shorts. I don't know what we're even going to call these shows at the moment now, but if it's not called that, we'll call it. I'll edit something else in there. So there we are, the Millwall 1945 World Cup final.
It's Nick and Neil's Summer Millwall History Show.